We are alone. In a world filled with life, we stand as a species in solitude. We look out into nature and see so few that relate to human life. We find similarities in other animals. Elephants mourn the dead, lions play with their cubs, and whales sing songs that echo throughout the ocean. But it's not human. Because of this, it's hard for us to comprehend a world where other species of humans not just roamed, but lived very similar lives to our own. Because of this, we categorize our ancestors as primitive, stupid cavemen. This is wrong. With the rapid advancements of technology, we are discovering more and more amazing things about not only our past, but the history of our world. Over time, it seems that ancient humans were far more advanced than we previously thought. Carving art into seashells, burying the dead. These are prime examples that our ancestors were in tune with the earth and potentially concerned with life after death. In this video, we will be looking at one human ancestor in particular, Neanderthals. We will be looking at the day-to-day lives and traditions of these people, as well as some of the dangers they would have faced throughout their lives. Enjoy. Planet Earth, 400,000 years ago. The planet has just been through various extreme environmental changes. For the past 50,000 years, Northern Europe has been covered in thick ice sheets, spanning the entire width of the continent. But now, things are changing. Temperatures have warmed, and the ice has melted. The sea has risen to present-day levels, but Britain is still connected to Northern Europe by a narrow land bridge. Neanderthals crossed this land bridge and settled in Britain, but they weren't the first humans to do so. 500,000 years ago, Homo heidelbergensis once roamed these lands, but later retreated due to the harsh cold spreading throughout the continent. Late European heidelbergensis is thought to be the ancestor of Neanderthals, as some species have been found with Neanderthal-like features. These times are long gone, but temperatures still fluctuate over the next 50,000 years. And by 350,000 years ago, Neanderthals had retreated out of Britain. Neanderthals were able to thrive throughout large parts of Asia and Europe during tough environmental changes. Neanderthal remains have been found as far east as Denisova Cave in Russia, as far south as Israel, and southern Spain. Neanderthals were able to thrive in so many different environments because of their remarkable adaptations. Neanderthals had broad torsos and shortened limbs compared to other hominins, which granted a relatively high body volume with a lower surface area. This maximizes heat production and minimalizes heat loss. Their tall, broad, and generally large noses were particularly well adapted to cold air, as a tall, narrow nasal passageway increases the skin's surface area inside the nose, providing greater ability to warm and moisten cold, dry air typical of cold climates. Neanderthals had large, stocky skeletons, hinting at an impressively large amount of muscle. Muscle produces more heat than fatty tissue, but it also takes up more energy. That's where diet is factored in. Given Neanderthals' muscled frames, they likely had much higher metabolisms than other hominins. This demanded calories. A great source of calories is large-bodied game, deer, ibex, wild boar, and occasionally mammoths and woolly rhinos. All this protein consumption likely boosted their metabolisms even more, thus making their bodies produce more heat. You're probably wondering, if Neanderthals were adapted for the cold, why do we find them in warmer places like the Mediterranean and Gibraltar? During the Ice Age, the temperatures in Europe fluctuated. Like I mentioned earlier, ice was constantly spreading and retreating north over the course of the Ice Age, and although Neanderthals were more suited to colder climates than Homo sapiens, they couldn't survive in polar environments, which is exactly what Europe turned into when the ice sheets would spread from the north. When the ice sheets would spread, the Neanderthals would retreat south to the Mediterranean and southern Spain. Once the ice had retreated back up north, the Neanderthals would reclaim their old territory. And with these migrations, the Neanderthals were able to adjust their behaviour to fit the circumstance. During cold glacial periods, they focused on hunting reindeer, which are cold-adapted animals. During warmer interglacial periods, they hunted red deer. It is likely that these migrations south is what resulted in the first encounters with Homo sapiens, resulting in trade, fighting, and crossbreeding. More on that later. The archaeological record is rich in Neanderthals' morphological and physiological adaptations, but their behavioural adaptations are more of a mystery. We know that Neanderthals made clothing, but scarce evidence of it has survived over the millennia. We also know that they often used caves for shelters and built fire for warmth and cooking. Finds like the eagle talons in Croatia and the evidence of pigment use in Spain give us small glimpses into Neanderthal culture. I won't go into too much detail here, as I've already covered Neanderthal art and technology in these two videos here, so if you want, give them a watch after this video. A very important part of culture is language and the exchange of information. It's very difficult to determine whether Neanderthals had spoken language, as the tissue associated with the voice box doesn't preserve. However, they did have a similar vocal anatomy, and their ear bones suggest they had a similar range of hearing to us. The evidence of how complex their social lives were also suggests that they may have been able to talk to each other, although their language may have been much more simple than ours. I can't help but find myself wondering, did Neanderthal language have an effect on our own, and did it help influence the languages that have been spoken through history? A young Neanderthal would have been born into a wild world teeming with life. The world at the time would have been very familiar to our own, yet so different. Filled with wildlife that are the ancestors of many animals in today's world. Many animals that are alive in Eurasia today existed alongside Neanderthals. Brown bears, elk, wolves, modern birds, deer, horses, and European bison. Animals that live elsewhere in the world today would have also lived alongside Neanderthals, like hyenas and lions. But perhaps the most fascinating animals to live alongside Neanderthals are the now extinct Ice Age megafauna. The world at this time was dominated by megafauna, especially compared to the modern world, where Africa is the only continent that managed to hold on to many of these magnificent animals. The megafauna that is now extinct that also would have lived alongside Neanderthals are mammoths, multiple species of elephants and saber-toothed cats, woolly rhinos, cave bears, and the Irish elk. Many of these animals would have been very dangerous to live alongside, yet alone hunt. Neanderthals seem to have hunted mostly large game, but they are also known to have hunted smaller game, such as birds, rodents, and even fish. The reality is that Neanderthal diets would have been dictated by their surroundings. For example, the Neanderthals that lived in the coastal cave in Portugal were feeding regularly on fish, whereas evidence in Germany shows that Neanderthals adapted to hunt giant elephants called Paleoloxodon antiquus. With sharp stone tools, they harvested up to 4 tons of flesh from each elephant carcass. The degree of organisation required to carry out such butchery and the sheer quantity of food it provided suggests Neanderthals could form much larger social groups than previously thought. The find comes from a trove of animal bones and stone tools uncovered in the 1980s by coal miners near the town of Neumark Nord. Beginning in 1985, archaeologists spent a decade observing the mining work, recovering animal bones and stone tools from a sprawling site. Dating to a relatively warm period in Europe known as the Eemian Interglacial, 75,000 years before modern humans arrived in Western Europe, the discoveries include the bones and tusks of more than 70, mostly adult male, straight-tusked elephants. Most of the bones had been left in dozens of piles along the ancient lakeshore over the course of about 300 years. But what's most amazing about these bones is that when they were studied under a microscope, almost every single bone showed signs of butchery. Gouges and scratches on nearly every bone show the hunters were thorough. The bones hadn't been gnawed by scavengers like wolves or hyenas, suggesting nothing was left for them. In the past, Neanderthals were thought to live in small, highly mobile groups of about 20 individuals at most. But the hunting of these elephants suggests a far bigger group. The researchers determined the elephants had been hunted and not just scavenged because of the age and sex profile of the remains found in the quarry. Most of them were males, and there were few young or old ones. Adult male elephants would have been easier to hunt than females, who tend to move in herds protecting their young. Whereas adult males are solitary animals most of the time, so they are easier to immobilize, driving them into mud and pit traps. Other finds at the site suggested Neanderthals hunted a wide array of animals across a lake landscape populated by wild horses, fallow deer, and red deer. From fish to elephants, horses to bears and lions, anything was on the menu for Neanderthals. Evidence like this fragmented spearhead found embedded in a wild ass in Syria show that Neanderthals hunted by either throwing or stabbing their prey with spears. Other evidence like this 6-year-old fallow deer skeleton from Germany show that Neanderthals had thrusted a spear into the deer's pelvis, leaving an 11mm circular wound in the bone. The truth is, Neanderthals would have changed their hunting techniques depending on the prey. For example, evidence suggested that Neanderthals would have used fire at night to scare choughs deeper into the cave where they roosted, until they reached a dead end and were caught by either hand or nets. Neanderthals also killed cave bears as they woke up from hibernation, waiting outside the cave to ambush the bear and then skinning, eating, and stealing its cave. Despite their ability to adapt and hunt most animals in their environment, there were still risks that a Neanderthal could suffer crippling injuries. Life was hard for most animals in Eurasia during the Ice Age, and that goes for Neanderthals too. The precious remains of our ancient human relatives reveal crushed limbs, fractured skulls, and broken ribs. One specimen that lived a long and painful life was Shanidar I, nicknamed Nandy. Nandy lived in a cave that sits in the Zagros Mountains in Iraq. The early years of life were rough for Nandy. He suffered a blow to the side of the head at a very young age. The blow damaged the left eye, most certainly blinding him. The blow also damaged the area of the brain controlling the right side of his body, leading to a withered right arm and possibly paralysis that also crippled his right leg. Nandy also seemed to be missing his forearm. The pointed angle on the end of the arm has led researchers to speculate that Nandy's right forearm was amputated. If that wasn't enough, Nandy also suffered another blow to the top of the skull, which could have led to his bony growths in both ears, which would have certainly caused some sort of hearing loss or complete deafness. Despite all these injuries, Nandy also suffered damage to his toes, where a healed fracture can be seen, and injuries to his leg and knees, which would have caused some sort of limp. So how did this man, against all odds, survive? Researchers at the site predict that Nandy was between 35 and 45 years old when he died, and most of these injuries had partly healed. Nandy survived because his group cared for him, nursing him back to health slowly but surely. Without any sort of healthcare or support from his group, Nandy would have most certainly died. Once Nandy was nursed back to health, he could hardly contribute to the group. Activities such as hunting would have been near enough impossible. Travelling to gather would have been very difficult due to his various problems with his legs, knees and feet. And he was hardly a good lookout at camp, with him being partly blind in one eye and near enough deaf in both ears. There is no clear reason why Nandy would have been kept alive by his group. In many animals and even some Homo sapien societies, when a tribe member is injured to the point where they can't contribute much to the group, or may even be putting the group at risk, they would be left behind or killed. But here we see a gleaming example of Neanderthal humanity, their kindness, loving each other, caring for each other, and that is why Nandy lived on. But social life wasn't all sunshine and rainbows in Neanderthal society. Neanderthals were very capable of violence between each other, but despite popular belief, there isn't much evidence to suggest they were more violent than Homo sapiens. A few Neanderthal bones have shown clear signs of fighting between each other. Whether this is infighting between tribe members or fighting other tribe members over territory or resources, we will never know. But what we do know is that these fights would have involved tools, and Nandy's blow to the top of the skull may have been a result of this. This infighting may have had a particular motive, especially when times were tough and food was low. 2 adults, 2 adolescents and 2 children were found in a small cave at Barma-Malagusi in the Rhône Valley in southern France. The bones bear many of the hallmarks of cannibalism: cut marks made by stone tools, complete dismemberment of the individuals, and finger bones that look as if they've been gnawed on by Neanderthal teeth, rather than by other carnivores. This isn't the only evidence of cannibalism amongst Neanderthals either. Remains from other sites in Croatia, Spain, and Belgium also show evidence of cannibalism. But in each case, there has been a lack of evidence to answer the question of why the Neanderthals engaged in this practice. Was it ritualistic, traditional, or an act of desperation when times were tough? We may never know, but all are certainly possible. Thankfully for Nandy, parts of his meals didn't consist of his own people like the Neanderthals in France. The majority of animal remains from the cave are made up of wild goats who still live in the mountainous area today. The Neanderthals at Shandar didn't just eat meat. Dental analysis of the plaque from one member of Nandy's tribe show they ate wild seeds, lentils, nuts, and legumes. Maybe here Nandy could have helped, picking these tiny seeds that grew locally to the cave. At some point, maybe while foraging for these little seeds, Nandy's group would have undoubtedly interacted with other human groups, mostly Neanderthals. These other groups of Neanderthals would bring and share their culture and ways of life. Perhaps they would have even met one of the elephant hunting groups that lived in Germany, migrating down south due to the bitter cold. But not all these groups would have been Neanderthals. Some would have been most peculiar. Nandy lived around the time Homo sapiens started entering Europe, and he lived exactly on the path some of the groups would have migrated through. This undoubtedly means that at some point in his life, Nandy's group would have encountered Homo sapiens. At some point in time, interactions between these species would have been peaceful. To say that interactions between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals always resulted in conflict is wrong. If this was the case, then why do we have Neanderthal DNA still in us today? Surely after a mixed child was born into a Neanderthal or Homo sapien group, they wouldn't have been successful enough to have children of their own. We know Neanderthals can be peaceful people, despite their many flaws that they share with us. Take Denny, for example. a half Neanderthal and half Denisovian girl, showing that Denisovians and Neanderthals could get on peacefully. Encounters would have happened multiple times all over Europe and Asia, and groups of Neanderthals may have run into multiple different groups of Homo sapiens, some friendly and peaceful, and some not. One of Nandy's tribe members, Shanadar III, seemed to have been violently attacked. A tiny groove on one of his ribs indicates he was probably struck in the chest. A 2009 analysis points to a modern human as the attacker. Based on the experimental stabbings of pig carcasses, a team led by Stephen Churchill of Duke University determined that the most likely weapon was some kind of dart shot from long range. Because modern humans are the only hominids known to have made projectile weapons, the researchers blamed our species for the wound. It's also possible he survived the attack. The bone showed signs of healing around something that was stuck in the groove, perhaps the tip of the dart, showing that he must have lived at least a few weeks after the incident, probably dying later from blood loss or injuries. Despite the risks and worries of conflict with other Neanderthals and species of humans, Nandy would have had to worry about other causes of death, especially because he was so impaired and vulnerable. Recently, a team of Spanish researchers used modern cases of carnivore attacks on humans to see if bite marks on Neanderthal bones bore similarities. Looking at 124 recent cases of attacks by lions, tigers, bears, leopards, and other carnivores on modern humans, they found similarities to marked bones in the fossil record during the Pleistocene between 40 and 200,000 years ago. In one case, they pinpointed the carnivorous perpetrator. Puncture marks in the skull of a young Neanderthal child unearthed in a cave in Valencia, Spain, resembled those from a modern big cat. Although predators were unlikely to hunt adult Neanderthals as prey due to Neanderthals being the apex predator, the younger and injured members of the group would have been at great risk, like the child that was killed in this study. Human children have always been at risk of predation throughout human evolution due to just how fragile they are. So we can expect Neanderthal children to fall victim to some of the predators that lived with them at the time. Thankfully for Nandy, none of his family were killed by predators, at least as far as we're aware. Nandy's life came to an unfortunate end when he likely died due to a rockfall in the cave. After a long and hard life, he now could finally lie and rest, while his tribe undoubtedly mourned his death. But Nandy's tribe didn't just mourn his death. It seems they mourned all their dead companions' deaths. Multiple signs point towards the Shanadar residents burying their dead. Multiple bodies have been found in the same locations, as if they were intentionally buried together. Two other bodies resting in burial-like positions show evidence of plant matter that have decomposed into the dirt around both bodies. Is this evidence Neanderthals buried their dead with flowers? This has sparked a debate amongst researchers. One of the bodies also seemed to have possessed a flake stone in one of their hands. Was this placed here intentionally? We simply don't know. One thing we do know for certain is that the Shanadar cave is the home of one of the most beautiful and significant sites in the world. In this cave, we find evidence of the difficulties Neanderthals faced in their lifetime, as well as a heartwarming example of their humanity and morality, caring for loved ones, burying and mourning their dead. They truly were human. Thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoyed and wish to see more, then please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. See you in the next one.